Gauthier, more treats, please. That's all I need.
Today we're doing a financial reset, which I am so excited for. I have to give some major credit to Carter Sullivan on YouTube because she has been so inspiring for me. She makes a lot of these videos on how exactly she budgets her paychecks, how she resets her money goals, and she's in her 20s. And I just think that her content is so useful and so needed in this community. And so I'll have her down below. I just have to give her a shout out because she is such a big inspiration for me doing this video. I know this video is probably gonna be quite long, so you can just skip to whatever section that you want, but essentially for the breakdown of this video, I wanted to share one, how we budget our money as a married couple. I'm 23, if you guys don't know me. I live in Dallas with my husband and my golden retriever. And in this video, I'm not gonna be sharing exact amounts of money. I know that's really useful for a lot of people to see exactly how much each paycheck is, exactly where every single dollar is going. This is not gonna be that video. This is more just exactly how, but there are a lot of other people on YouTube who do show exact amounts if that's something you're interested in. I just don't want you to waste your time if you're looking for that in this video in particular. And then I'm gonna break down exactly how, if I get paid or if Aiden gets paid, where exactly everything goes, because there are quite a few different buckets. And then I'm gonna share a bit about investing, how we like to invest, not exact systems and strategies, but just kind of like our method in general. And then I'm gonna share our money goals for 2022 and how we have learned to be better at budgeting money and being more financially responsible within our marriage, because no one really talks about merging finances and all the things that come with it and how to just be in a healthy spot with your finances, especially within a marriage or if you just have joint finances with your significant other. And so I'm going to be sharing that, and then I'm going to finish with a little Q&A of questions that you guys asked over on Instagram. I also just want to say that I don't know everything. There's so much more to learn. I don't think anyone probably knows exactly, and I also don't think that you should ever just look at one person as a figurehead of how you should spend your money, how you should save your money, because we are obviously all in such different situations. There are a few people I'll mention that I like to look up to for finances, but for the most part, I think you kind of have to learn as you go and not compare yourself to other people. I got my laptop up. So to start off, when it comes to budgeting, we don't have an exact budgeting method in terms of tracking every single expense that we have, every single payment. I will break down exactly how we like to move our paychecks, because that is definitely more rigid, and that has become more rigid within the past, I would say, year of our marriage. We don't use like YNAB or Every Dollar, but I think that those are both great resources if you are looking to start a budget. I think especially tracking money when you're just starting with trying to like figure out where money is going, it's super helpful to have that. But what we do instead, so Aiden at the end of each month will go through and see exactly where everything did go in terms of those buckets. And then if there's an area that we felt was a bit too high or we just got a bit out of control in, we will reset for the next month and figure out how to not spend as much in that area. So that's what we do. We do that monthly. That's one of my big things in terms of figuring out finances with your spouse that I think is really helpful. So I'll talk about that later. I will say that Aiden has a budget template that he uses. So I'll have it down below if you guys want to use that. If you want somewhere to start, it's just an Excel sheet, so you do have to manually track everything. But I think especially when you're starting out, it's helpful to have that so you can actually track everything and you know where everything's going. It's not something tracking it for you. So that'll be linked down below. And in that, there's also like a month over month view that you can do where you can actually see where everything's going to. And that's what we use when we look at where things are going at the end of each month. I did that in the past a couple of years ago, and I know a lot of people really appreciated that. So I wanted to have that resource in there too. For paychecks. So for me, my paychecks vary a lot. I do YouTube full time. And so in my experience, I have found that I will get paid a lot of money, a lot of brand checks will hit at 1 month, and then I will be kind of dry for a month. And so with that, it is extremely hard to budget and save. And that is why I would say we err on the side of being very conservative with our finances. Something that has changed our finances that I appreciate so much is actually bucketing out money. So for us, we have a bunch of different buckets, and each time we get a paycheck, money's gonna cycle down through these buckets, and it has helped so much for saving for a house, making sure we have money set aside for taxes, making sure that we have an emergency fund. And when I say buckets, I mean these are actual buckets in our bank account, so they're different checking accounts or savings accounts that we have, and it is so helpful when things are split up, so you don't just have this massive lump of money in your checkings that you think you have all this money when it actually needs to be going towards a lot of different things. So essentially, I do think this is budgeting, but it's more just bucketing things. My husband gets paid every other Friday, just like a traditional 9 to 5. But when I get paid, like let's say a payment hits our account on a Friday, this is essentially how I like to go through. And I'm actually going through it right now because I need to move some stuff over. The first bucket is taxes. So especially if this is my income, I pay my income taxes quarterly as like a self-employed person. And so that money is set aside. I cannot believe a couple of years ago, I would just keep the tax money in my checkings account and not set it aside. Set aside your taxes so you know exactly how much you have to budget and save, because it's crazy when you just look at your gross income, it looks so high, and then it goes through all these buckets and you realize you actually don't have as much as you thought. So the second bucket is our savings. So I would recommend having some sort of emergency fund, and this depends on your lifestyle and how much you actually need in terms of expenses. So for ours, it's about 6 months to maybe a little bit more of if one of us lost our jobs, if our car breaks down, if our dog has a crazy vet bill. It's nice to get used to having a set aside of money that doesn't go towards a house, that doesn't go towards groceries. It is set aside for truly emergencies, but that is money that we have in our bank account that's set aside. And then after that, we have our tithing money. So this is a percentage of money that we give towards our church. Money can very easily become a big controller of my life, and it's been really helpful for us to get used to giving away 5, 10, whatever percentage amount. You find when you start being more generous with your money that you actually hold less tightly onto it. And then number 4 is our rent. So currently we do rent this beautiful apartment that I love so much, but it is a hefty expense for us. And so that actually gets put into its own account, that when we're ready to pay our rent at the beginning of each month, that money is already set aside. That's been really helpful to do. We started doing that a year ago instead of just having that in our checkings, because we'd always have the money to pay it, but it's just nice to know it's set aside and you don't think that you have this money to spend on like furniture or something when it actually does need to go towards rent. Number 5 would be any debt that you have. Currently, we don't have any debt. Our car is paid off, which I appreciate. I would love to get another car, but right now it's nice not having a car bill. It's nice knowing that we own our one car that we have, but in the future, a mortgage, whatever it may be, this is where I'd pay off student loans if we had them. And then we have our checkings account. And so this is the account that we like to keep all of our money that goes towards expenses. So things like groceries, things like just like day-to-day things that you need, utilities. We try our best to just budget off of my husband Aiden's income for this, for those daily expenses, because I do think it's helpful to get used to just budgeting off one income, especially if one of you loses your jobs, or just to kind of avoid lifestyle inflation. But we don't do this perfectly. Like, I'm just gonna be honest, we definitely do spend the money that I make, even though I see our money as joint, on expenses. And it's just not realistic, I think, especially in today's world, to think that you can just budget off of one income. But we do try for the most part. And then number 7, by this point, this is kind of the extra money that we have. And this is where it depends on what your financial goals are, but ours is definitely buying a home. And so for the past year, this money has been going into like a down payment savings account that we have that's actually a high yield savings account. So it's actually earning interest, which is nice. But that money is not in our bank account, because I have found when you don't actually look at your savings that you have, it's easier to save. It's easier just to take that money, move it right over, and just not look at it, and then maybe look at it once a month or so. This also includes like housing costs that we anticipate having, all those. And so for the past year, we've been contributing to this, and it's been really helpful just to have that in a separate section too. One of the only people that I'll really talk about this, that I've been obsessed with his videos recently, is Marco, Whiteboard Finance Guy. Love his videos. I think he has a very similar approach to finances that we have, and so he's been really helpful, especially when it comes to learning exactly what price of a home you can afford. He has like a whole Excel sheet and everything. It's super helpful. I'd highly recommend his channel. I'll have it down below. But we had an amount of money that we wanted to save to put towards a down payment, so that was our goal. And then after that, this is where we get into the investing side of things. And so I would say for the most part, we focus on passive investments. And so there's passive and there's active investing. You can definitely hire someone to do this for you too. You can have a personal wealth advisor if that's your thing. It's just helpful even if you just want to learn and like sit down with someone. But for us, I'm very thankful that Aiden knows a lot in this area, and I have grown to know more in this area just by starting to invest myself. And so we also have this in a separate account. We use Fidelity to invest, and so that is where that money goes. And then lastly is just a retirement contribution. So I'm filming this in January, and I actually do need to move this money over because for me, when you're self-employed, you obviously don't have an employer who's matching your contributions to your retirement. So I have a Roth IRA that I contribute to yearly. For one, it's a tax deduction because you owe a lot of taxes when you're self-employed, and so it's nice to bring those down a bit, and it's nice to know that's going towards your future retirement. So I'm gonna make that here in January. This can be something too that you do gradually if you are self-employed. So maybe you do a certain amount each month, and then at the end of the year, you make that contribution when you have however much you want to set aside to do that. I can just say I started this when I was 19, and I didn't put very much in there, but the effects of compound interest are so high, and it's just crazy. Again, going back to, I used to think these were things that you just did when you were really wealthy, but I didn't put that much money when I was 19. But now that I'm 23, that's only been what, 4 years at this point. It has grown so much from that. And so I think starting a retirement fund, if you have an employer, trying to do as much as you can and trying to see how much they can match. Aiden does his through his employer, who has a great like matching amount, and so he does a decent amount of his too. I think retirement is something that's easy to forget about, and I don't think it's the most important thing, especially when you're starting out too. That's why this is kind of like the lower thing on the list. Actually, it probably should be before investing too. I think investing is probably the last thing on this list, but I do think it's important to consider it. It's something that I need to make sure to make note of today because I need to make that before filing my taxes. So when it comes to money goals, I wanted to share some goals that we have for 2022, but also kind of share just things that I want to improve in. I think that it's really important to look back and reflect and see what you can change, especially when it comes to money, because you can still be really unhappy and have a lot of money, but it does give you a lot of choices in life. And I think especially when you're thinking about, like building a family and all those things, I think it's important. The first one is just not to bleed into lifestyle inflation. This is so easy, and I'm sure everyone can relate to this. The more money you make, the more money you want to spend, the more you want to have a nice car, the more you want to have a nice home. It is so easy, especially with social media, to get caught into wanting to just look like you have this amazing life, but you're overspending. I think the biggest area with this, we don't want to overspend on a house. It is so easy, especially right now, to feel like you can buy more home than you can actually afford. In a couple of years or so, I really hope to have a family and to be able to start having kids, God willing. And I want to make sure we're in a place where we're not used to living this really expensive lifestyle where it's harder to fit that into the equation because we have already gotten accustomed to having all these nice things, just the two of us. And so I really want to make sure that we keep our expenses down as much as possible. I'm not perfect in this area. I like nice things. You just got to know what works for you, but I want to try to keep avoiding that in the new year. Spending more on experiences, that's another big thing I've learned in the past year, actually getting to do our weekend trips and getting to spend time with Aiden and bond together doing those brings me so much more joy than buying a new couch or just having fancy things, having really nice clothes. I think I got better at that in the past year, but I just want to focus on that again in the new year. Spending less on groceries. This is a very simple one, but lately I've been so bad about going to Whole Foods and Sprouts, which I know have really high quality groceries, but I want to be better at actually picking out, okay, I can spend more on meat because it's more important, but I don't need to buy all these really fancy expensive snacks as well. And just be better at meal planning, because that has always been a big area for me where it's so easy for me to spend so much money on food. And especially when it's one of those monthly expenses, it's easy to just do it all the time. And I definitely want to get better at that. So that's another thing. Also, just being generous. I think that's always something that's really important, and just looking for ways to go out of our way to be generous with our money, because again, money holds a lot less tight of a grip on you when you learn to not let it control you so much. And I think when you're being generous with other people, it brings you so much joy, but it also takes that control out of the equation too. And then lastly, is just to research more about different investments. I would love one day to be able to have an investment property, but I first want to buy our own home first. But I just want to start researching it more, because I think a lot of times when it comes to finances, you just think that, again, things are beyond you, but it really is incredible to see that normal people do things just a little bit differently with their money, and it makes a big difference in their life, which is why I think, filming videos like this and hearing what works for other people is really important. And so one day I think it would be so cool to own an investment property, rent it out on Airbnb. I love watching those TikToks. And then when it comes to actually doing finances within a marriage, I wanted to share just 5 tips if you're merging finances, if you're getting married, things that have worked for us, because I would say the first 6 months of our marriage, we really didn't have a plan and money was kind of going everywhere. And I felt a lot of freedom once we really just had a plan and sat down. And so for us, I know not everyone merges finances. This is just what we do. So I'm sharing our method particularly. One is just to have a plan. I know when you are sitting down with someone and you're both motivated to have the same thing, both motivated to buy a house, both motivated to pay off debt. I said that weird. Motivated to buy a new car. It's easier to save up for those things. But also, I think it's important to remember that sometimes you have goals too for yourself. Sometimes Aiden wants to make a purchase that I don't necessarily want, but if it's gonna bring him joy, I wanna work towards it too. And I respect when he does that to me too. And so making sure that you communicate about those things. And if there's something that you believe shouldn't be a goal, just talking that through. Number 2 is just having a threshold for an amount of money that you're willing to spend. And if it goes beyond that, that you need to ask the other person. I know this is something that a lot of people do. It could be $100, it can be $200, it can be $1,000. Like, I don't know what place you're at in life, but making sure that you communicate about those purchases can be really helpful. Number 3 is just to know each of your approaches to finances. One of the only other resources I wanted to mention, Rachel Cruz has a really helpful book. It's about like know yourself, know your money. I'll have the name of it right here, but she talks through how everyone just has such a different approach with money. You typically are more inclined to be a spender or a saver. I think it's helpful to know what your spouse's tendencies are. So I'll be okay with spending little bits of money each day, but he's okay with not spending money for a while and then making a really big purchase. And so talking about that and knowing your approaches and knowing your tendencies so you can kind of balance each other out, and also how you're raised and the thoughts that you have about money coming into your marriage, I think is really helpful. Like I mentioned, the monthly budget check-ins are also super helpful. So this is something that Aiden will sit down, go through everything, and we'll see where we're at. There are periods of my life where I would just avoid looking at my bank account because I didn't want to see the damage, but there's beauty in clarifying those situations that you don't really like. And lastly is just to not compare yourself. I know this is really basic, but it's so true. And I have found that I have dealt with it more within marriage because I look at other married couples and see the kind of house that they have, the kind of stuff that they buy. Someone's stuff that they have is not a reflection of their happiness. It's not a reflection of how wealthy they are either. And you are at your own place, and it's not going to be good for your marriage if you're constantly comparing yourself and your money to someone else. Be thankful for the money that you have and see it as a blessing and try to steward it well. Don't constantly look at other people and think, I wish we were like that, because that's just gonna bring bitterness into your relationship and it's not good. And I know that from experience. I'm gonna go in through some of the questions. This first one says, how do you decide what credit card, etc., to keep and join together? So for us, all of our finances, our credit cards, everything is joint. Actually, that's not true. I think Aiden has a credit card that he had in college, but I never had a credit card until we got married. And I forgot to mention that paying off our credit card is also a part of the process in our budget, but I consider that also to be expenses because that's kind of the money that comes out of our checkings account, because we have been trying to use our credit card more often over the past year just to develop better credit and to start getting more points, because that's an area that I think I did not really know a lot about. I think just deciding what works for you. I mean, some people like to have a lot of different credit cards. We only have like 2 credit cards, so I know that everyone's different. I feel a lot more comfortable not having a ton of credit cards and just having a couple. How did you and Aiden merge investment portfolios? So we did that in Fidelity. You can just call and figure out how to merge. It honestly was super simple to figure out how to merge smoothly, communicate it well, especially if both grew up thinking about money differently. I think this is a great question because we do grow up so differently when it comes to money. I think sitting down, especially before you get married, but if you've never done this within your marriage, I think it's also helpful, is to establish that you are your own family now, regardless of what you come into the marriage with. It's about the both of you now. It's not about you as as individuals, you're very much a team. And I know for me, when it comes to working towards these goals, knowing that we're a team together has been so motivating. And I think I've learned so much more about money because it just feels really good being on the same page as someone, and it's very motivating and special. And I think that's something that I hadn't heard about. It just seems so kind of like brass tacks when it comes to money, but it's motivating when you're working towards something with someone else. And so sitting down, figuring out, despite how you were raised, how you want to move forward with money, what you think about money. I think that premarital counseling is really helpful for this reason because you can talk a lot about that and figure things out. And even just sitting down with your bank too, like very practically sitting down and figuring out how to merge, how you want to move everything together. And that is also why I love that Rachel Cruz book, because it helps you identify a lot of patterns in your life and a lot of the patterns in your spending and how you can break those. Not to plug that, again, I'm not about just taking one person's advice and using it for the rest of your life, but I do think that her book is really helpful. How much of your income percentage-wise do you invest and why? Also where? So I kind of mentioned the where aspect of the index funds and everything, but this has changed throughout our marriage. Once we were really gung-ho about saving for the house, it definitely became more of that was the priority at the moment, but especially with inflation and everything, having just a large chunk of money sitting and not accruing interest, which is why I think having a high yield savings account is somewhat helpful. It's important to change your perspective and your strategy depending on the world and depending on your goals. And so for us, I don't really think there's a percentage, especially because my income varies. So I'd probably have a more concrete percentage to share on here if I was working a more traditional job, but I'm not. So it kind of depends. How to stick to your budget when income is low and city cost of living is high. So this is a great question. This is a big reason why we live in Texas and not somewhere like New York City or San Francisco. It totally depends on you. And I think for different people, it's worth spending more money to be in a city like that. Maybe you're making more at your job. Maybe it brings you a lot of happiness. But for us, we just know our goals don't really align with living in that city. I think this is a very practical thing to assess, especially if you're getting married. Like, life is going to be a lot more expensive in those places. You're probably going to pay higher taxes too. So it just depends on you and the way that you want to spend your money. But I think just knowing that you can't do it all, you can't spend money in all areas of life. I mean, there are a lot of areas that I would love to spend more money on, but I just know it doesn't make sense because it doesn't go towards our goals and what we want. And so you just have to know that you can't do it all. You can't do all of your desires that you want. And even if those desires aren't lavish things, like even if you want to pay off all your debt at once, but you just know it's not feasible at this moment, not beating yourself up about it and knowing that it takes a long time to hit those goals. And I think this is why it's important not to compare yourself to other people. This is a good one. She says, how did you financially plan for quitting your job? So for me, I know that there are a lot of people who work 9-to-5 jobs and they do YouTube at the same time, but it just got to a point where I had a few years of records of making money on doing this online. And if you have a side gig, I think it's important to have a track record of that money kind of increasing and it being diversified. So once I got to a point where I was making streams of income that were on a lot of different realms. And so it took just having that track record and having the confidence in myself, knowing that I also could do it, but being very practical. And also knowing if I continued to work like I was back then, that I would probably live 10 years less because it was just so much on my body and my soul. And I just knew that it wasn't worth a little bit of extra money that I was making at the job compared to what I was making on here. So I think just having a plan, and even if you don't quit the minute that you want to, setting yourself up where you have the amount of months that you want to be able to make it happen. And I mean, just being totally real, I also knew that we had planned on getting married, and with him having a steady job that was a 9-to-5, it gave me a lot more confidence to be able to quit what I was doing because I knew we were merging and I knew that just practically it was going to make sense to be able to do that. And I think it's important to mention that too, because I think if we weren't getting married and if I was going to continue to be solely autonomous in terms of finances for the next few years, I may have made a different decision. I don't know. I would hope that I would have made that same decision, but can you explain why you want to put 20% down on a house? Why not FHA loan? So I'll link the video that I talked about from Marco that I think is really helpful. He kind of talks about this a bit more, but again, it's just a personal preference. And he talks about that in that video. Not that I'm taking everything that he says exactly for my life, but I think he just explains it in a much better way. So I'll have it down below. Having personal money when in a marriage. So we don't have money that, let's say we each get $300 to spend a month or something like that. I think it just depends on you both. If one of you is really inclined to make random impulsive purchases, this might be a good route to go, because then you know you have X amount of money set aside. But I think the thing that I mentioned about if it's a certain amount of money, asking the other person is kind of a good way to go. Who is in charge of managing your finances, you, Aiden, or you both? It is very much both of us in charge. And I know this is different for everybody. Some relationships, they like to have one person in charge. I think it's been really healthy for us as a couple to both be invested in it, because we also both know where money is going, and it's not an expectation for the other person to keep up with it, but it's very much both of us. He is much better at Excel, so when it comes to tracking and doing those month over month estimates, he does a lot of that, but we're both sitting down going through it and coming up with goals after. So it depends on the couple, though. I also think that everyone has unique gifts and God gives us all different abilities, and so if one of you is much better at it, that's great. I just don't think that one person should be entirely removed, because that also can be dangerous if something happens down the line and you just want to be a part of it. This is a good one I didn't touch on, but it says, do you keep your business finances separately from your significant other? So I personally just track all my business expenses monthly. We do have a separate card and account for business expenses. I totally forgot to mention that. There's so many different things, but he's aware of those things, but I would say it's mostly up to me to track that. I also like doing my taxes a lot, and I like being able to track the expenses and seeing like how different legislation affects our finances and all that. And so it's mostly me. There are so many other questions that I could have answered. I did not get to everything. If you would like for me to do a podcast answering the other questions, I would love to do it. Maybe I could get Aiden to do that with me too. Let me know if you're interested. My podcast is always down below, but I hope this was enjoyable. Again, not an expert, but if anything, I just hope it inspires you to take more control of your finances, even if you do it in a different way than we do, because it does bring a lot of freedom, and it feels good to kind of uncover the things that can sometimes be a little bit scary. So let me know if you enjoyed. Let me know if you want to hear just more finance videos on my channel. I'd love to do some more. Again, hoping to get that house this year, so we'll see. But thank you guys so much for watching. I'll catch you guys in my next video. Bye guys.